Hello, I'm Dalton Stamps. I am the campus minister at East Carolina University with Pirates for Christ. And I know Rodney, and I also worked at Central for a little bit. I was an intern, and so he asked me to do one of these devotionals. So I want to talk to you this morning about the book of Ezekiel. I love the book of Ezekiel. I think it's a really interesting book. It has a lot of ties with it's in between Jeremiah and Isaiah and Daniel, and it also works really well with those books because it's actually talking about the exile. It's an Old Testament book, and it sometimes, because of that, gets a lot of flack because we sometimes see this, which is not really there, but this perceived dissonance between the Old Testament and New Testament. And this is one of the books that I think really, I think all the books do, but this one especially kind of hits home against that for me. So Ezekiel opens up in the middle of the exile. All right, Ezekiel is the son of a priest. So he by rights should also be a priest, but he is not in Jerusalem. Ezekiel is not at the temple. Ezekiel is instead, he is sitting next to a river. And this river, the Kabar River, is in the middle of Babylon, or is on the way to Babylon. And he is, along with the other exiles from Jerusalem, he is a man displaced. And we get to see this kind of crazy thing that happens that we don't necessarily understand, but these visions that kind of we see from Daniel as well. God comes and picks up Ezekiel and brings him in mind and spirit to the Temple Mount in Jerusalem. And there we get to see played out all of the things that caused Israel to go into exile. We see the temple worship, but the worship not of God, but of these other gods, these lowercase g gods, and the idolatry that was there, and the things that basically ended up leading to Israel's destruction at the hands of the Babylonians. And Ezekiel sees, we fast forward for a few chapters, and he's there. God has had him do many things to show and to represent the destruction of Israel and the destruction of Jerusalem. And we get to chapter 10. And this is where something both terrible and amazing happens. We see the glory of God in the temple, which is kind of like Isaiah in his gospel, or not his gospel, in his book, when he sees the glory of God in the temple and the robes. It's a crazy story there in Isaiah 8. But in Ezekiel 10, we see something different. We see this amazing picture, and I keep on saying the word amazing because that's a hard word to describe what it really is. We see this crazily written description of the glory of God, and it lifts up from the temple and it begins to depart. And then the end of this section here, we see that in the end of in verse 13 of chapter 11, Ezekiel cries out, he falls face down, he says, "Alas, sovereign Lord, will you completely destroy the remnant of Israel?" And we kind of wonder why. We don't really understand why, but for the people of Israel at this time, the people of Judah, the temple is where God is. And if God is not in the temple in Jerusalem, then God is not the God of the Israelites, because that's their mindset, that we have the mercy seat of God is there, and the Holy of Holies is where people go to meet with God. The temple is where people go to sacrifice to God. It's the place where God is among them, is at the temple. And if God's glory is not in the temple, if God is not in the temple, then God is not in Israel. And we're tempted just to stop there, because just the painful moment that Ezekiel goes through, he falls down on his face, he cries out, "Will you destroy the remnant of Israel, Lord?" And then something changes. We see in verse 14 of chapter 11, and continuing on to the end of chapter 11, we have this description of the glory of